Hello, hello. Welcome to the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Please take a moment to read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. If you're a school, a classroom, librarian, or educator joining us, for good news, our school visit fund is back. You can enter to win a free virtual visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. And you can find your link to the entry form in the chat. I'm excited to be here today with you. My name is David Valdes, and I am the author of Spin Me Right Round, Brighter Than the Moon, and Finding My Elf, which comes out next month. And I'm very excited to introduce you to today's featured authors, who I've been chatting with a little bit backstage just now, and I think you're really going to enjoy them. Vincent Tirado is a non-binary Afro-Latinx Bronx native. The author of Burn Down, Rise Up, they ventured out to Pennsylvania and Ohio to get their bachelor's degree in biology and master's degree in bioethics. They've had short stories published in Desert Rose Lit Mag and Faya magazine. Born and raised in Arizona, Sonora Reyes is the author of contemporary young adult novels The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School and The Luis Ortega Survival Club. They write fiction full of queer and Latinx characters in a variety of genres, with current projects in both Kidlit and adult categories. Sonora is also the co-founder of QPOC Fest, a virtual book festival celebrating queer and trans BIPOC authors and books. All right, so the way that today is going to work is I have questions for each of them, and then questions for both of them together. And then I understand we have some questions from you, some questions that have been submitted in advance, and we might have some time for questions from the chat box. All right, so let's get started. This is a question for Sonora, and I will be asking questions today specifically about the Luis Ortega Survival Club, but you can answer, of course, about any book. But this first question is very specific. Your character, Ari, is neurodivergent. So how did you approach crafting her portrayal?
So I kind of share a lot of the experiences of Ari, not the experiences, but the brain stuff. So I'm also autistic, and when I was a kid, I struggled with selective mutism like Ari does. So basically what selective mutism is you can only talk when you feel completely safe. So usually only around certain people, or like there's a lot of situations where you just cannot talk, like anything, like if you're outside of your safe space, like your home. So like for Ari, she can't talk at school. So everyone thinks she just doesn't talk, because that's like one of her not safe places. Um, so for me, it was kind of interesting crafting her because she was the first time I wrote an autistic character like myself. So I finally got to like actually explore into a lot of my brain space and the things that I do without having to like hide that it was like an autistic thing. Because I feel like usually like when I write characters who like aren't autistic, I accidentally make them autistic, but I just don't say it. So it's kind of cool to like be able to say like, yes, she's autistic and this is what she's doing because she's autistic. And so it's just like it's kind of different because like with Yami from the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, Yami let a lot of people have asked me like, is she autistic? And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, like I just didn't know it. Like I wasn't doing it on purpose, but like because I'm autistic, like a lot of the things that I think are just normal brain things are like autistic things. And so a lot of people read my characters as autistic, even if I don't intend them to be. So it was really a breath of fresh air to write Ari, who like I could just say like I could just lean into it fully without having to be like, what would someone who's not autistic do in this situation or think in this situation? It was just I could just write how I would react or what I would think, and that was really nice.
And remind me, is is this book already out, or is this about to be released?
It's already out. It came out
It's
in
already out.
May. Yeah.
Okay. So have you gotten feedback from other autistic readers or people who have autistic people in their life responding to the book in that way?
Yeah, so I've gotten a few messages like on Instagram and stuff, just people being like saying like, oh, they really loved it. They were like, I felt seen for the first time as like an autistic Latina person, or like, you know, because there's not a lot of intersectional autism portrayal out there, at least yet. Like there is some, like, but there's not a lot from like BIPOC people at this
Mhm.
point. At least that I know of. If there is, like, let me know. I would love to read it. Um, but as of when I wrote the book, I wasn't aware of any in YA at least. So I I think that a lot of people were very hungry for that kind of thing, and so I have gotten some messages of like people being grateful that it's so like explicit on the page. um yeah, so
Great. Vincent, a question for you. So Raquel's father's practice of Santeria plays an important protective role in her story arc. So talk a little bit about that choice, where that came from, and how you envisioned that as you wrote.
So I generally like when I originally wrote it, I didn't know anything about Santeria at all. My family grew up like heavily Christian, and so I had no real connection to it. And also, it was just very difficult for me to ask questions because it'd just be like, "Oh, we don't talk about that. We don't do that here." And I'm just like, "All right, but I kind of need that for my book." So I ended up like I decided to do it because in the Bronx there are like a vast majority of people who do not all subscribe to like the same belief system, and I wanted to portray that in a way that is respectful, and also like just to paint like a much fuller picture of the Bronx.
Great. Have you? The book has been out for a while, yeah.
Yeah, it came out last not this May, but the last year's May.
Have you heard any feedback from anyone who was excited to see it in the book, or
Oh
that it
yeah.
spoke to them?
Yeah, so I went to same high school that the book is set in.
Nice.
I did like a school visit there because that was the high school that I also like graduated from, and like one of the students was just like, "I'm very happy to see like a respectful portrayal of it in a book because like that's what her family practices." And she got like very frustrated with like a lot of the media surrounding like Santeria or like hoodoo or like it's always like something very aggressive, very mean spirited. And so she was just happy that it's like, okay, it's not that. Like this is a much more respectful way of approaching it rather than like the usual way that a lot of media tries to paint it.
Yeah, as a Cuban, I was excited to see it in the book, partly because when you do get the very limited references you ever get to see at all, seem to always go to goat slaughter, right? It's sort of ridiculous, right? And so the
Mm.
fact that you had like objects, beads that are protective and powerful, and were handled as part of the story, but there was nothing. Uh, Especially in a story like this, there was nothing sort of like mystifying about them, right? You made them a part of someone's life that then had a value, and I thought that was lovely. Um, Sonora, was it hard navigating how to write the character's trauma? Um, the character has experienced, and we're witnessing it kind of in real time. The character navigating their own trauma. So talk a little bit about that. You have a great foreword to the book.
thank you. So first and foremost, I wanted to make sure this was a book for people who have experienced trauma, not for people who are trying to learn about it or anything like that. So I wanted to be respectful, and I didn't want it to be like too triggering or anything like that. So that's why the trauma happens off page before the book starts. And the book starts like, after that has happened, so that it's not like I didn't want it to be like gratuitous or anything like that. I wanted it to be fully a healing story, like just a story where we get the, you know, it's a revenge fantasy. So it's it's all about an imperfect victim getting the perfect revenge, you know, like so I think for me, I think it's very important. Like one of the main things I wanted to drive home was that excuse me, that Ari in this book is, she's not the perfect victim. She is angry, she's messy, she makes mistakes, but she still deserves justice and she still deserves to have her happy ending, and she's going to get it. She's going to fight for it with every like ounce of her being, and she's going to get it. And so, and that's not a spoiler. It's like, you know, I want people to know from going in that it's going to be a happy ending. And yeah, I just it was really healing for me to write about, because I feel like so many of the narratives around trauma are just about the trauma and not about the healing and the catharsis that can come from, like, you know, finding your people and finding your community of like other people who've experienced something similar, and, you know, like found family, getting revenge. I shouldn't say revenge. I should say justice, because, you know, I'm not advocating for people to go out and, you know, take it into their own hands. I can't say that. So I will say it's okay to fantasize about whatever, and it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to want to see yourself in a different position. And I think that a lot of the times the messaging we get is that like anyone who desires justice or revenge or whatever is like morally corrupt. And I wanted to kind of like change that a little bit and make it so like, okay, these kids who like have all been wronged by this guy, they want to make it right, and that doesn't make them bad people. It just means that they, you know, are taking justice into their own hands. So
Well, in the book,
sorry, I love the fact that for our first book we both wrote about lesbians, and for our second book we both wrote about a revenge fantasy. I'm just realizing that we both did that.
Yeah, so funny. Like our books are so different, but like the themes, yeah. Like
well, actually, let's go ahead then and skip to one of the shared questions, which is, I read your books back to back, and it's, you know, in both cases, it's really important to the narrative that solidarity is what allows for motion in the two novels. You both wrote these novels in which it is the coming together of a group that actually makes the action happen, that makes the solve possible. So talk about that. Talk about solidarity and community, and why that was important to each of you. Maybe Vincent, go first this time.
So for Burn Down, Rise Up, that's a very interesting question, because I think I approached it differently in Burn Down, Rise Up and my second book, We Don't Swim Here. So in Burn Down, Rise Up, it's definitely about the Bronx. And I wrote it about like solidarity and community because I feel like that is a part of Bronx history that doesn't get talked about a lot. When people think about the Bronx, it's never usually anything good. Especially when it comes to the 70s, there's always like, oh, it was a very dangerous time, et cetera, but no one talks about like why, or like how did it stop being dangerous. It's just kind of like, oh, it was bad, and then it suddenly stopped and everything's fine now. So I went that route, in that like the community came together because this is like this is our home, so of course we want it to get better. And that was like the first book. The second book, the community is shying away from something that they have no business shying away from, and it becomes a revenge fantasy for the individual that is wronged. We Don't Swim Here is very specifically a ghost story, in which two cousins who are like in this small town keep butting heads until they like accidentally release a ghost that is very upset about the way they died. And is even more upset about the fact that the town tries to hide why. And so like this, it still has a theme of like, as a community, you need to take responsibility for what happened. Otherwise, like things don't, like no one heals from it. Yeah.
So I am so sorry. Apparently, in reading the materials, I missed "We Don't Swim Here." Is that the new book?
Yes, that came out
And
this past May.
okay, I apologize. So I didn't
It's
like.
okay.
I've read questions. I have questions for the wrong book.
It's
So
okay.
then we'll cycle back around then in our questions and get more to that story. I was thinking about the Bronx specifically and the way that you actually use the Bronx as a character in Burn Down, Rise Up. It's not just set there. The Bronx whole cloth becomes a character that is so impactful. So what were you going to say to that question about why it's solidarity for motion, Sonora?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so with the Luis Ortega Survival Club, basically, for anyone who doesn't know, like Ari teams up with like an anonymous pen pal to like get her revenge on this guy, and ends up joining this club, the Luis Ortega Survival Club, where like everyone there hates him and wants to do something about it. And it starts out with them all just like wanting revenge. But eventually they have to realize, like, they have to question, what is this friend group if all we talk about is this guy that we all hate? And like, do we have anything in common? Do we want to like be friends like outside of this trauma? And the answer is yes. They love each other, and they like need to like find common ground and everything. So basically, um it's a story of like, you know, finding your community, but also like moving on from things without necessarily having to brush them aside. Like fully like being able to talk about it and heal from it, but also not having to like necessarily make it your everything, and to be able to like find other things that make you happy and that you want to like spend your time doing, and being able to sorry, I don't know if this answers the question.
No, it does, and it's interesting to hear that. Again, you and Vincent have some overlap here. If you're talking about that idea of you shouldn't look away from things, right? Things that have happened, things that are real. You shouldn't look away. Like how do you face something? How do you see
Right.
something while still living your life? That sounds like an echo then of the "We Don't Swim Here."
Right.
Which is so you two are just having a psychic conversation all the
Yeah.
time. Have you ever met in real life?
Oh
Yes, we
yeah, a couple
have.
times.
Okay, that's great. I love it. We do a lot of these events, but I love it when you get to meet author peeps live, and then
Yeah.
your community is bigger and fresher. So Sonora, in your book, parents try and fail in this book, right? How does that serve your character stories, and why did you include that?
So I wanted a story where the parents felt like realistic without I struggled a little bit writing the parents, because they are so, I feel like with YA, it's a hard line to cross, where if you make the parents too flawed, it's like gotta be, you know, because it's for young readers, and their parents are the ones giving them the book sometimes, and so they don't want to give them the wrong message of like, oh, parents are bad, or you know, anything like that. And so there's a hard line that you don't want to cross, of like being like, oh, adults are bad or something, but at the same time adults are flawed, and we do need to acknowledge that there does need to be accountability there. And I think with the Luis Ortega Survival Club, we see, I don't want to give away too much, but Ari's mom has her own fair share of trauma, and she has dealt with it maybe not in the most healthy way. And so you can see what that can do to a person if it's left unchecked, you know? So with Ari, she's, you know, finding her people and she's trying to heal and she's, you know, fighting for her happy ending and all of that, where her mom didn't necessarily get to do all of that. So her mom is still kind of going through, you know, the aftermath and all of that. So that's kind of, you know, not necessarily like an excuse for like why she acts the way she does, but it's an explanation, I should say. I wanted to portray like imperfect adults and have not necessarily like to make them like the goal wasn't to like have everyone feel bad for the mom and be like, oh, she totally like, I understand why she's this way and like it's okay that she's this way. Like it's not okay that she does the things that she does. But I just kind of wanted to show that like, you know, everybody is in their own journey of healing, and some people are not, you know, as and sometimes it's the adults. Sometimes the adults have more growing to do than the kids. So often I know I do. Like there are some teenagers who are like way more, you know, mature than I am or than I was like at that age. And so I think it's an important message for both adults and teenagers to like take in, is that, you know, everyone is flawed, and it's, you know, your parents aren't necessarily like perfect and they're not going to be perfect, but you know, I think, yeah, I just wanted to show like a flawed parent, or parents, you know, the dad is also flawed, but like they're trying, like they're actually trying, but they're just not getting it right all the time. So
Well, and you talk about like you talked about Ari not being a perfect victim either, right? And
mhm.
it's something that I think all of us have probably bumped up against a little bit. Editors can get a little nervous, right, about imperfections, right? Like if our character says a mean thing or does the wrong thing, sometimes editors can get
Mhm.
anxious about that. Whereas I think our instincts as writers, right, we're trying to show humans, and humans are messy, and
Mhm.
it's much more interesting to me to read a flawed character than a perfect character, because the
Yeah.
flawed character I can relate to, as
Right.
opposed to that ideal perfect character.
Yeah,
And you're
exactly.
right, the parents in these books, it is tricky because they're often either just complete ciphers, or like perfect or pure bad guys, whereas as opposed to being adults, you know,
Mhm.
round adults. um, you know, even like, you know, Raquel's father like provides something that is really valuable to her, but is not in themselves an unflawed person. And you know, and you see a little tension, a really natural tension between, you know, parent and child there, where they can't deliver what the other needs in a moment because that doesn't suit their needs. Talking about Burn Down, Rise Up, this is, you know, it should be a movie, but you're using a lot of horror conventions, but you're also really messing with them. You're also playing with horror conventions. So talk a little bit about what horror conventions you kept in the writing, what ways you kind of came up with your own horror language. Why horror?
So because I decided I wanted to write a story about like the Bronx and community and like reading about what happened in the 70s, it felt very naturally sort of a horror story. Like there's a line in the book that says there's a ghost in every brick. Like it just felt more natural to be like, okay, this is definitely a horror story. Um, that being said, like there are some horror conventions that I'm just like, this is dumb and I hate it. And there are some where I'm just like, it's dumb, but I still love it, you know? Like, so
Sure.
one of the things I definitely kept was like, oh, they split up, even though they tell each other we're not splitting up. They like it's dumb, but I was just like, you're gonna split up. I'm sorry. This is just how we're going through this. And in another one, what I've always hated in horror conventions is like, let's say you come across someone who is like maybe an antagonist or not meant to be your ally, and you try to help them out, but then they kind of backstab you, and you're just like, oh, but you know, I still got to help them. So Raquel comes across these other kids in this horrific world, and she's just like, oh, let me like go and help these kids. And then they're like, oh, like we're pretty much cannibals now. We're gonna eat you. And she's just like, all right, never mind. Like, you made a mistake. Like, don't cross me. I'm petty. That's like something that I've always like wanted to see, where it's just like, just don't save them. Like they made their bed. They're gonna lie in it. Just like, you can leave them alone. That's on them. Like I just
Raquel
always
does not
hated
have
that.
to become it. Raquel does not have to become an angel here, right? You
Yeah,
let Raquel.
no. She has her. She's already doing a lot. She's just like, I'm
Yes.
just here to save like one person. You are not. You were like a bonus at most.
Yeah, for sure. And We Don't Swim Here has a ghost. So you love some supernatural.
Yes, I love it so much.
Like, has this been true like since you were a kid, like ghosts and like the eerie and that sort of thing?
I have always been interested in ghosts, I guess, because, you know, it's like confirmation that there's something after death, you know, that there's like, not that I would be opposed to of like, oh, you know, nothing happens after death. Like, I was not alive once before I was born. I could do that again. Like, that's fine. But it's more interesting if there's an afterlife, there's ghosts. And when I was growing up as a kid, my brothers and I would always watch like ghost hunting shows. Before we had this this panel, we were Sonora and I were just talking about like BuzzFeed Unsolved. Like, I'm still like very hardcore and like, oh, I want to see you know, what evidence there is of the supernatural. So that's always been something that I'm like I can't let go of. I'm always thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm with you in that. I love all the things that we don't know, right? I'm what I'm currently working on or mapping out is a book in which a young gay man discovers his boyfriend's dead and has been for a long time, but he's kind of a great boyfriend, and so he's trying to decide, does he help his boyfriend shuffle off this mortal coil, or keep him trapped here because he's a good boyfriend. You know.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
It's a dilemma we've all had, right? And speaking of romance, so both books, both of the ones I read, I'm so sorry, both books feature queer romance and self-discovery around that, right? So talk a little bit about that, both from the perspective of telling Latinx stories and also about the moment we're in politically. Sonora, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So the question is queer.
Talking about like including queer romance and self-discovery, both as, you know, in Latinx Kidlit and also just in the time that we live in right now.
Yeah. So I don't actually know how to write straight white people. I don't know how to do it. I would do it horribly. So my default is always queer Mexicans in whatever form they come in. You know, they could be, you know, whatever, just queer Mexicans, you know, because my sexuality and gender is kind of wibbly wobbly. So I've tried a few different things, but I can't deny that part of myself, that it exists and that I want to write it. I feel like, especially in this moment where all of our stories are being challenged, it's more important to show that we are still writing them and that we're still here. Sorry. And just that, like, I'm never going to stop. And, you know, they can ban my books as much as they want, but I'm going to keep writing them. And hopefully it's really hard because I can't control how much access people have to my books, especially if they're getting banned. But I can control the fact that they're being written. And I can make sure that I continue to tell the stories that are in my heart. And I'm just going to keep shouting. And this is the way that I shout, is through writing stories. So I'm just going to keep doing it and writing my little queer love stories about Mexicans, you know, either falling in love or, you know, maybe if I do different genres, other things. But I I do love a good queer Mexican love story. And
Love it.
I don't know how to write anything else, honestly.
I also think that now we need t-shirts that say, I have no control over my books being banned. I only have control over them being written. That's phenomenal. That's so good.
Thank you.
Vincent.
God, that's a hard one. So I feel very similarly to Sonora in that, like, I mean, I haven't been told if my books have gotten banned. I think like I've skirted around it by like not having the word lesbian as a title. I'm sorry. I think I've just like no one noticed me. I'm just kind of on the outside edges. Like they don't notice that it's a queer book, you know? So every day I wake up and every time I wake up and I see another book banning or like something happening, I'm just like, this is a hell of a time to decide to be an author. Because I like when I started writing this like years ago, I didn't think that we would be having these discussions about book bannings and like AI and like all these other things. And I'm just like, man, I chose like a really interesting time to like buckle down and become an author. That being said, again, similarly to Sonora, I don't know how to write anything else. Every time I've written, all of the books that I've written, am writing, will be writing, like they will just always be Latina, like queer people, because that's just all I know. And like, this is a really funny thing that I'm never gonna stop thinking about. But someone on Tumblr once asked Neil Gaiman, like, "Hey, why did you become a writer?" And he replied, "I have no other marketable skills." And honestly, he was real for that one because I don't have anything else going for me. All I can do is write these stories. And all I can do is hope that it finds the people that need it the most.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had somebody very casually, literally yesterday, upon discovering that I was a writer, they asked what my books are about. And I talked about the young adult novels. And he said, completely straight up, he's like, does the lead always have to be Cuban American? And I said, when I was growing up, I would have killed for a Cuban in any story, a gay kid as the lead. And I never got to see both at once. Right. So, yes, the answer is yes, always and forever. You know, if I write 20, okay, that's 100,000% more than I grew up with. So, for sure. But the Neil Gaiman quote, say the quote again.
I have no other marketable skills.
Oh, okay. What was the question that prompted it, though?
Why did you decide to become a writer?
Okay, that's what I heard that flagged one of the questions that's in our chat. So let me just going to bring that open. The question is from Ines Lozano. Can you name a book that inspired you, helping you to realize you had stories to share too? So that seems relevant to that idea. Why did you become a writer? So a book or books that inspired each of you, helped you realize you had stories to share too.
This is gonna sound really funny, but like the first stories I read that I realized I was allowed to write myself into stories was fan fiction. Because before, like growing up, I hated reading. I always felt like I wasn't smart enough to be a reader. Like I struggled. I just didn't think it was for me because I had a learning disability and I wasn't like good at reading or whatever. So it wasn't until I discovered fan fiction much later in life that I was like, oh, people are making these characters who originally had no, it could be, any character, like, and they're like, I'm going to make them bisexual. I'm going to make them autistic. I'm going to make them mentally ill. I'm going to make them all these things that I am, because why not? And because I see myself in this character. So of course they have all these things that I have. So like, why not? And I started writing fan fiction before I ever wrote original stuff. And I wrote about my own stuff. And it was when I finally realized that like, oh, I can write about these things. And I didn't think it was a marketable thing. I thought it was just for me and my little fan fiction friends. But it opened the floodgates. So
for me, it wasn't fan fiction, but it was role playing online. I love the idea of making myself a little like self-insert character to interact with all these other characters, and so that's what I did. Like, I would make myself like, oh, I'm like this high-ranking ninja in like Naruto, and like this is what I do. Like in this, like I would always like do stuff like that, because it was like Sonora said, it was something like for me and my like nerdy little friends. I think like the first original piece of writing I ever wrote, I was in middle school, and I was like, I had like a notebook, like just I was handwriting the story of like, what if my school was actually some like, you know, large estate, and like all of the characters were based off like my actual classmates, and my classmates were actually interested in reading it. And we're just like, hey, this is really good, you should continue. And I don't know why I stopped, probably just because I had actual schoolwork to be doing. But like, that was like my first original piece. And I think I was so nervous because all of the characters were like based on the real people. I was afraid that any of my classmates would be like, oh, I don't like the way that you like made me out, or like how you did this. But no, they were just like, yo, this is really cool, I love this. And I was just like, okay, I think I might have something here. Cool.
Nice. It's funny because I started writing plays in college. I love to read. I read all the time, but I didn't think, partly I grew up like super, super poor, right? So, you know, things had to be practical. So it never occurred to me that you could actually, I don't know, that one could just become a writer. I don't know why, for all the writing that I did. And I remember reading, in college, Christina Garcia's Dreaming in Cuban. And it was this whole book about Cubans, and I was just like, I wish I could do that. But I didn't think that I could do that. But I wrote plays. And it wasn't until I was actually like in my late 30s and had a kid, and I had been writing columns for publication, that I got asked to write a book. I got asked to write a nonfiction book. And my first thought was like, do I get to do that? Am I allowed? So really, it came really late in life. And then the first time you give yourself permission to do something, everything changes, right? That realization that, you know, I can be a writer if I want to be a writer. I can tell the stories I want to tell. And the last few years, when I've been focused on young adult fiction, it's been really freeing that right now, for this moment, and I'm going to knock the wood that my computer is sitting on, publishers are excited about that, and are trying to be welcoming to voices we haven't seen before. We have another question in the chat. This one is specifically for Sonora, but I'm gonna apply this to both of you. The question was, how close to your parents were the parents in the book? And what I will bounce off of that when we get to Vincent is, you know, have you ever like, how much have you stolen from life for your characters?
So I'll talk about both my books. The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School is a little bit more closer to my real like family life, I guess. At one snapshot in time. The Luis Ortega Survival Club, the parents are nothing like my parents at all. Like, my parents are like, I base them on my friends' parents. I was like, yeah, so there's no relation really with the Luis Ortega Survival Club. With the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, it was a little bit more similar. But yeah, it wasn't, you know, I just made it up.
So for like, I based the mom in Burn Down, Rise Up a little bit on my mom, in that she is a very hardworking woman. She's a single mother, very Christian. So like that, like was kind of almost one-to-one. The dad, I did not base it off my real dad. I based it off another author. So I based the dad off of Daniel Jose Older.
Nice.
Which the man has never met me, so I'm just like, listen, Daniel, if you have seen this, no, you didn't. You don't know about this. It's fine.
That's hilarious.
And I base it off him in the way that, because I was a huge fan of the Shadow Shaper series, which he wrote. And like, it was like my first introduction to like, oh, you can just write, like Puerto Rican kids, like doing magical stuff. Like you can just do that and no one tells you no. And so, and like hearing about his background, I think I remember he was like an EMT at some point. And so I made that the dad. I was just like, I need a reason for the dad to be out of the house. He's going to be an EMT, just like Daniel Jose Olden. And that was just like how I like approached it.
That's great.
When thinking about like you've already said that Ari bears a lot of attributes that you have, Sonora. Vincent, any of your characters in either of the books have a high dose of Vincent DNA?
I would definitely say Raquel has a lot of me in her, in that, like, growing up, I've always been, like, I was told that I was very sarcastic and a little bit no nonsense. And, like, now as an adult, I'm just like, I think I was just a little bit autistic and y'all just never picked up on it. Like, I don't know what was happening. So I kind of wrote her in the way that she was kind of like me, and that, like, I had friends, obviously. Like, Erin is Raquel's best friend, and, you know, she, like, can tolerate her the brother Mario. So I wasn't like bullied or anything. It was very difficult for me to like connect with others, and so I did the same with Raquel, where it's just like, you have your friends, you have, you know, who you need to, but there is almost sort of a disconnect between you and like most other kids.
Fair. I'm just gonna, this is a comment not for you two, but for viewers. We have 7 or 8 minutes left. We need to be wrapping up fairly soon for our part of the discussion. So if you have more questions that you want to throw in the question box, drop those in. For now, I'll keep going then. Are there other Latinx authors, young adult or non, that you've read in the last couple of years that that book just like sung for you and you want to give them some props right now and tell people, read this?
I'm most recently I've been reading Hatchet Girls by Diana Rodriguez Wallach. We just celebrated her release Wednesday. It was 2 days ago. And it is very, very good. It is a Lizzie Borden inspired book. So this Puerto Rican family that lives in River Fall, I think Massachusetts. I want to say it's Massachusetts. And one of the brothers gets accused of like killing his girlfriend's parents with a hatchet. So yeah, it's very inspired by like Lizzie Borden and stuff, and like just the way that she is navigating this Puerto Rican family, being like, yo, but he didn't do it. I don't care if his prints were on the weapon. Like, I was just like, that is so much like a Latino thing to do. I haven't finished the book, so like I don't believe he did it either. There's some spooky stuff happening, but like it's just like, okay, yeah, the Latino family would act this way. So that's what I've been like sinking my teeth into now.
Okay, and remind us the name and author.
The name is called Hatchet Girls. The author is Diana Rodriguez Wallach.
Okay, great. How about you, Sonora?
So books I've read in the last couple of years that have like inspired my writing. Yeah. Is that the question? Okay.
Or just that you dug, that you just enjoyed and you want to tell people, read this book.
Yeah. Oh, so many. Okay. Probably the first one that like was a big game changer for me was Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova.
Yes.
That was my first like aha moment of like, oh, I can do this in publishing, not just in fan fiction, you know, like that kind of thing. So that one was really special to me. Excuse me. I really love Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas.
Oh yeah.
And it has inspired some of my own writing that hasn't been published yet, but will hopefully eventually get published. So just like I've been really into the speculative and paranormal and that kind of stuff lately. which is very different from what I've been publishing so far. So we'll see what happens with that.
Okay, I'm glad you gave a shout out to Zoraida, who her books are great and she's a lovely person.
Yeah.
Her foray into adult this past year, The Inheritance of Orchidea Divina, is phenomenal and mind blowing. We have a question from a chatter wondering about what you do to put yourself in the mood to write. Do you meditate? Do you listen to music? Every writer I know has like superstitions about how and where they can be to write, what conditions they need. So what do you do to get in the mood?
Coffee. It's just, I need like an IV of coffee, just like straight into like my veins. Like I need the coffee.
That's so funny. I make book playlists. So like I'll make a Spotify playlist for each of the books that I am writing or working on, so that when I'm not writing, I can just have it in the background listening to it, and it like gets the gears turning of like ideas and stuff.
That is interesting because I've only done book playlists after I finished writing, because then that way I know what happens, and so I can link it to like music, because during the writing and revising process, I don't know what will like change. So like it's always after the fact that if anyone wants to listen to the playlist for We Don't Swim Here or Burn Down Rise Up, it's on my website, I promise you. But like that's the way that I do it.
It's so funny. I split the difference between the two of you in that what happens for me is, especially once I'm writing, if I'm stuck on what a character, if I'm trying to get to know my character better, if I'm wrestling with where a character's at, I start making playlists midstream. So that's really interesting.
Nice.
I don't know. I don't know about you. I'm really at this point very superstitious about first draft writing. I can edit anywhere, right? You can hang me upside down from a bar somewhere, and bats are flying around. I don't know why I went to vampire. I can edit anywhere, but to write first draft, I need something behind me. If I were in the middle of a coffee shop and there's a lot of empty space, it would be deadly, right? Like I need a space behind me. I know I can write really well from anywhere from 5 a.m. to 2, but after 2 I can't. Do you have quirks like that about your writing?
Sometimes when I feel stuck, well, this is a common question I get, like, what do I do when I have writer's block? And usually my answer is like, I either need a change of scenery, so I will go for a walk, I'll go to the library, I'll go to a cafe, wherever else that's just not home. Or like I have to think of something very exciting to happen on the page that will get me excited about writing it. But like, that's just like what I do for like, just to keep myself in the writing mood. It's just like, okay, go for a walk if I have to, make some coffee, think of something super exciting to happen right now, and like try and fit that into the book somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Sonora, do you have any suggestions? Because I think it's probably the question I get every time I lead a writing workshop, or from aspiring writers. What do you do to challenge writer's block? So Vincent goes for a walk.
Yeah, I actually have to question where the block comes from, because a lot of the time when I have writer's block, it's my body telling me that I need something. So I'm like, okay, have I eaten today? Have I had enough water? Have I had enough sleep? Have I, do I need a hug? Have I, you know what I mean? Like all of the needs that a body has, that a person has, are those fulfilled? And if not, go do that and then start writing. And if all my needs are fulfilled, then I have to figure out where the block is coming from. Am I burned out? Do I need a break? Like, because sometimes writer's block is a good thing. Sometimes it's your body telling you, stop overworking yourself. You're going to get sick, if you keep going. And then, of course, sometimes it is story related. So if none of that is true, if I haven't been overworking myself and all my needs are met, then I just have to ask myself, okay, what happens next in the story? Do I know exactly what's happening? Why am I hesitant to write this? Is there a plot hole? And then at that point, I will call a friend and be like, can I talk this through with you? Like, I just need to talk about this book and I need to talk about what happens next. And then usually after I talk about it, then I can write it.
I love the phone a friend idea. That's really fun. My number one piece of advice when people ask about writer's block is break up with the idea of writing in order. You don't have to keep writing forward. if there is a scene you can picture, if there's an image you can picture, if there's this bit of dialogue that you already know you want to use, go write that thing, right? Come back at some point, right? You haven't lost forever if you just break up with that specific moment. Go do the thing. It is 10:51 and we are supposed to be wrapping up here. So I want to say thank you both so much for this conversation, which was delightful. And I hope that Sonora is going to a book event in California this weekend. Vincent is going to Comic-Con. I hope that you have fantastic times. And those of you who attended today, in the chat, you will find links to all of our books because, of course, you would love to read them. We hope that you've enjoyed all of the events of Latinx Kidlit Book Festival, that you'll check out the remaining ones. Thank you so much for attending the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival, specifically the Throwing Out the Rulebook panel. And we're glad that you made it.
Thank you.
Thank you.